need to cover as Christians, at least some of the basic things, because here lately, this has become a big brouhaha in Washington, D.C. and other parts of the country. And that being guilt by association. If you look this up on Wikipedia, it shuts you over to another website called Association Fallacy. It says it's a formal fallacy that asserts that properties of one thing must also be the properties of another if both things belong to the same group. For example, a fallacious arguer may claim that bears are animals and bears are dangerous, therefore your dog, which is also an animal, must be dangerous. You see the problem with that kind of thinking. When it is attempted to win favor by exploiting the audience's pre-existing spite or disdain for something else, it is called guilt by association or an appeal to spite. That's not a very wonderful thing. Carl Sagan noted that people laugh at such geniuses. They laughed at Christopher Columbus when he was around, remember? And the Wright brothers when they were first starting out. But they also laughed at Bozo the Clown. Now, you see the thing here. I mean, since you laugh at Bozo the Clown, Christopher Columbus and the Wright brothers must be like Bozo the Clown. No, you see how goofy thinking can get? This is the problem you have with a lot of smart people. Sometimes they don't think right. They may be real smart, but somehow their thinking gets off of. And this is the deal with the guilt by association. Now, I have an introduction here. In the introduction, I have the publicans. Remember the publicans that Jesus ran across, the tax collector people that everybody in the Jewish nation kind of hated because they worked for the Romans and yet they were Jewish people. And they're a real good example of guilt by association. In Luke chapter 5, verse 29, it says this. It says, and Levi made him a great feast in his own house. Now, Levi, by any other name, was called Matthew, the author of the book of Matthew. So here he's given Jesus, he's a disciple of Christ, and he's given Jesus Christ a banquet at his house, okay? And Levi made him a great feast in his own house, and there was a great company of publicans and of others that sat down with him, but the scribes and the Pharisees murmured against the disciples, saying, why do you eat and drink with publicans and sinners? You see the guilt by association there? They're trying to make the disciples as guilty and awful as they thought the publicans and sinners were. No. You can go down to Smokey's Barbecue House on Saturday afternoon and you can eat you some barbecue. And there's all kinds of sinners in that room. Does that mean you're a sinner just because you're sitting at Smokey's eating some ribs with a bunch of sinners? No. Guilt by association is not a good thing to practice. And you shouldn't do it. But yet, it's a real problem in society, especially nowadays. Yeah, we've even had that problem in the church. You say, well, Christians wouldn't do that. You want to bet? Psalm 83:5 says, for they have consulted together with one consent, they are confederate against thee. Now, this is talking about some of the enemies of Israel, and I want you to notice, I'm not going to preach about the enemies of Israel, but I want you to notice that, for one thing, they consulted with one another. In other words, people that are associated with one another, they have meetings together and they talk about things, and they say, well, what do you think we should do? What do you think we should do? And then they finally decide. They get together and they decide on one thing they're going to do. One consent. So that's consulted again, and they make a confederation. In other words, they get together as a group and they do this as a group of people, whatever they're going to do. There's all kinds of good people that do that, and they do good things. This word associate, it's a stronger word because it's used, the word associate is also used with the word join. Now, where do they use the word join in the scriptures? Well, it talks about a man and a wife. What does it say about a man and a wife? They two shall become what? One. So here's two people marrying each other, and they become one person in God's eyes. But yet you can go out and join the Lions Club or the Golf Club or the Flower Arranging Club, and you're not married to the club. You just joined it. So we kind of have a strong meaning of the word join, and associate, and we kind of have a weak meaning of the word. Now, there's a lot of preachers that belong to associations. These are called ministerial associations. And usually it's an ecumenical Christian group that is active on a local level. And normally clergy, that means the preachers, from various congregations including Anglicans, Baptists, Catholics, Congregationalists, Lutherans, Methodists, Moravians, Orthodox Church, Presbyterians, and Reformed Church. They often meet monthly to discuss the local issues and how they can collectively address these things to help the community. And sometimes they also hold, like every year they have a town Lenten service and a town Easter service, and that's run by the ministerial. I guess when that started out, whenever that started, way back in the midst of whenever, it was probably a good thing. But then God got left out of it for the most part, and by the time you got to the mid-20th century, you had other preachers standing up and saying these ministerial associations are wicked and evil and have nothing to do with them. There was a guy in Texas named J. Frank Norris. The Ministerial Association in Dallas, Texas got so mad at him, they tried to murder him 3 times. Good Christian people tried to murder another preacher. Isn't that wonderful? No, not. In 2 Thessalonians, if you want to turn there, in chapter number 3, Paul talks about different kind of things about this being associated as a Christian, and it's important to you to be associated with the right things. I know a lot of Christian men that belong to the National Rifle Association. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Mostly it's a gun club. They send you a magazine full of advertisement to buy this kind of rifle or that kind of gun or whatever. Sometimes they have political controversy comes along because you have one group that wants to get rid of the constitutional rights to bear arms, and they get all up in the air and they say, no, the Constitution says what it says, and they're right about that. Other than that, they just do what they're going to do with their little club and, don't bother anybody. But, some people get all upset because there's the rifle club. Well, there are frisbee clubs, and, there's bird collecting clubs. There's all kinds of clubs. 2 Thessalonians 3 verse 14 says, "And if any man obey not our word by this epistle, note that man, and have no company with him, that he may be ashamed. So here's some Christians that the Thessalonians have come across, and they're disobedient Christians. Some part of their life is being disobedient to what the Word of God says, okay? And Paul said, look, these people have become real bad testimonies, and unless they're going to get right with God and come back to God, you need to disassociate yourself with these people. Sometimes you have to kick people out of a church as a pastor. I've had to do that. It's not fun. It's not great. It's not wonderful. I don't like doing that. Don't want to do it. Thank God I've only had to do it for a few times. But disassociating yourself basically means, if someone's living like the devil, don't hang around them so much. Now you say, well, I work with that person. It's going to be a little tricky, but you can pull it off. 1 Corinthians, if you want to turn there, 1 Corinthians chapter 5. Paul discusses this same subject. Actually, he talks about this quite a bit off and on in the scriptures. Let's look at 1 Corinthians 5, verse 11. Then we're going back up to verse number 9. It says, but now I have written unto you not to keep company, if any man that is called a brother be a fornicator, or covetous, or an idolater, or a railer, or a drunkard, or an extortioner, with such a one, know not to eat. In other words, you're to be careful of your testimony, even among other Christians, because, like I said, some Christians live like the devil. So why does Paul say that? Well, he's trying to encourage the ones that are living like the devil to come back to the Lord. If all of a sudden nobody in the church is going to have anything to do with you, especially back in Paul's day, you might think twice about what you're doing. Look at verse number 9. He says, I wrote unto you in an epistle not to company with fornicators. So even in the church, there has to be a little separation between people that are living really, really sinful lives. Now, I'm not talking about folks that have been accused of something that's not guilty, or somebody's being gossiped. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about someone that's it's clear to everybody that this person is doing bad things. Okay. Now, in Acts chapter 10, verse 28, Acts 10:28. The Bible talks about this association thing, 10:28. And he said unto them, I know how that it is an unlawful thing for a man that is a Jew to keep company, or to come into one of another nation, but God has showed me that thou shouldst not call any man common or unclean. The Jews at the time, if you were a Gentile, especially if you were an idol worshiper or someone that, like a evil Roman soldier that was doing bad things, the Jews wouldn't have anything that they wouldn't eat with you. They wouldn't go into your house. They would just ignore you. And God showed Paul that as a Christian, you're really not allowed to call on, say that about folks. After all, we're supposed to preach the gospel and get folks to receive Christ. Well, if you call everybody you don't like stinky and unclean, they're not going to pay attention to you. And that's what a lot of religious people do. That's what's wrong with the Amish and the Mennonite kind of groups, because they're so high and mighty that they don't reach sinners. They stay in their own little group and do their own little thing, and people look at them as an oddity. Maybe they well should have. I looked at associated, and of course the word gang came up. Okay, a gang of people is people that are associated together. Well, of course, when you talk about gangs, one of the subjects that comes up is the Old West gangs, the criminal gangs of the Old West. And I have quite a list of them that I found online. These were gangs that were Arizona, New Mexico, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas. Now, say, what about, like the gunfight at the OK Corral? That really wasn't a gang against a gang. That was some people that were having problems with some law enforcement people, and they decided to, shoot it out in the OK Corral. That's a different thing. But if you look up some of these gangs, now these are not all the gangs. Some of these you're going to recognize. You had the Styles gang, which is actually a very famous gang, if you know anything about Western history. The Bummers gang. I don't know what the deal with them was. The Charon gang. The Bass gang. Now, there was a guy, an outlaw called Bass. His last name was Bass. And he had a gang of people. You may have even seen his picture in some of the encyclopedias and things. The Tom Bell gang. Captain Ingram's Partisan Rangers. Oh, that's a good one. These were like vigilante people that, went after people they didn't like. There was actually a gang called the Cowboys. Yeah, kind of generic. You have the Dalton gang. Has anybody ever heard of the Dalton gang? Sure you have. That's a big one. You had the Dodge City gang. You had the Doolin Dalton gang. The Dalton gang evolved into that. You have the Jack Taylor gang. You have this is a good one. They were named the Five Jacquelines because they were all named Jacqueline, or I don't know, probably pronounced different than in Mexican. You had the Hole in the Wall gang. That's a famous gang. You had the James Younger gang. Do you remember Jesse James? You had the Lincoln County Regulators. Amongst their members was this guy called Billy the Kid. You remember him. You had the McCandles gang. You had the Newton gang, the Reno gang. You had Selman's gang, the Seven River Warriors, the Soap gang. There was this outlaw, his last name was Soapy. His name was Soapy Smith, they called him. And he had a gang, they called it the Soap gang. What they would do is they were up in Alaska, and people would discover gold, and they would rob them going back into town to, take care of their claim and put their gold in the bank and stuff. You had another gang called the Wild Bunch. You've seen a movie about them. Remember? The Sundance Kid. What's his name of the Sundance Kid?
Butch Cassidy.
Yeah, Butch Cassidy. That was the Wild Bunch. All right, so these are all associations that are bad associations. And yes, in the Bible, you had people that were badly associated. Turn to Psalms 106. Psalms 106. And let me show you. We could go over the numbers, but we're not going to. We're just going to look at this kind of a summary in the book of Psalms. Psalm 106:17. Well, look at verse 16. And they envied Moses also in the camp, and Aaron the saint of the Lord, and the earth opened and swallowed up Dathan, and covered the company of Abiram, and the fire was kindled in their company. The flame burned up the wicked. Okay? This was a story in the Old Testament where they rebelled against Moses and Aaron, and they said, well, who put you in charge? Well, God put them in charge. So they were rebelling against God's leadership. God said, have everybody go away from these guys' tents. And as soon as everybody was away from their tents, God opened up the earth, swallowed tent, people, families, goats, everything, and then the earth went back together and they were gone. You don't want to do that with God's things. Okay? I don't say God will swallow you up in the earth, but, I don't know. Turn back to Psalm 86. And here's an interesting verse. 86:11. It says, teach me thy way, O Lord, I will walk in thy truth. Unite my heart to fear thy name. I think I'm in the wrong verse. Oh well. I was supposed to have a verse about preachers, but I don't think. Well, the Bible talks about preachers all over the Bible. One of the things a preacher is supposed to do according to the New Testament? What about? He said, preach the what, Brother Vic?
The word.
Preach the word. I'm supposed to get up here and preach the word. If I don't preach the word, I'm not doing my job. Let's talk about this guilt thing. Are you, do you remember Jimmy Swaggart? Andrew? He was a TV preacher. And he, he died in 2025. He was 90 years old. But he was an American Pentecostal televangelist. And he had a regular, was it a daily program or a weekly program that he had? I forget. But it was a regular program. You know, he could preach. Most of what he taught, he was Assembly of God. And Assembly of Gods are a whole lot like Baptists, except they believe in speaking in tongues, some of them. Some of them don't. And anyway, he had this TV thing. Well, he was cousins with Jerry Lee Lewis, the singer, and another guy that was a musician called Mickey Gilley. Very famous guy in the country and western rock and roll thing. But he was ordained as a pastor in the Assemblies of God. And during the 1980s, he became a televangelist. He had big crusades in cities. He would go and have these big meetings. He ended up owning Sun Life Broadcasting Network. He founded the Jimmy Swaggart Bible College, and he became the senior pastor of the Family Worship Center in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The trouble is he got tempted to go visit a prostitute, and folks found out about it. And he's very famous because, you know, the Assembly of God defrocked him, took away his credentials from the Assembly of God. He decided to go ahead and become a non-denominational minister. But still, the fact that, you know, a major denomination that he's with for all these years defrocked him. And so he ended up getting on television and very weepily apologizing to everybody that was watching him and telling everybody he had sinned and done this awful thing. And you know, some people thought that was great. Some people thought he was just being, you know, a hypocrite. I personally think he meant that apology, and I think before he died, he repented over that stuff. But by that time, his reputation was ruined, and you know, he kind of went off the scene as any kind of a major preacher on television or anywhere else. You know, he associated himself with some bad things. Maybe he only did it once, but that was enough to ruin his reputation and association and ruin his ministry. And I always felt real bad for the fellow. I really did. Because he had done such great things. There's many people that came to Christ because he preached to them. So, what can you say about those things? Except he messed up. And he will stand before God. When he got to heaven, he will stand before God and give an account. And I don't know what's that going to be like. It's really none of my business. But, you know, that's one of these things where, you know, folks like to kind of rub it into Christians. Turn to Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12. Now, we talked about guilt by association. Here's one verse that doesn't have to do with guilt. This is redemption. by association. And every Christian that's saved has partaken of this. Aren't you glad that because we can be associated with Jesus, we can get forgiveness and we can be redeemed and have redemption on our soul? Romans chapter 12, verse number 5. It says, so we, being many, are one body in Christ, even one members one of another. So this is talking about the day you came into Christ, that there's all these other people through the ages that got saved, and we're part of this big group. When we get, what is that song? When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. That will be a great thing. But I thought I would look into this guilt by association. You know, they're trying to, you know, you made a phone call to Mr. Epstein. You're guilty. So you made a phone call to the guy. What did you know about pizza? You know, I don't know. You know, I mean, it's just it's gotten stupid. What? So a group of people. I'm not even sure who they all are, but they don't like other people, so they're going to use this disreputable guy, because he was kind of a disreputable guy, to try to ruin all these other people that knew him. Well, what does that mean? I went to Florida State Prison and talked to half the mass murders in the state of Florida every summer for 5 summers. Does that associate me with Ted Bundy and all those people? I talked to him. No, it doesn't. People have to use their sense, common sense. Anyway, I thought I would bring that guilt by association. Look, there's enough to hold people guilty about without trying to borrow from somebody else and stick it on somebody. And that's basically what you're trying to do when you do the guilt by association thing.